share his 30 years of experience in C-level banking and finance around the globe. Herman, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Paul. Hello.
Our headlines this week. Germany goes full Orwell on free speech. The Islamic takeover of the EU is commencing as planned, and the US deficit aids the EU war plans via the NATO summit and the 5% goal. Well, Herman, it's been a week in Germany. We both left it for reasons, and those reasons have now been shown in a drastic way, one could say, because what has taken place just in the last days, or to be precise, on Tuesday, I guess, on Wednesday, was a major crackdown all over Germany through federal police and local police, a crackdown on free speech, if you're quite honest. And what they call it is an action day, an Aktionstag, an action day against right-wing extremists. Bild, Germany's biggest tabloid here, jubilates about that and comes with this report. It says, Razzia gegen rechtsextreme Internethetzer, which would translate to federal police raid cracks down on right-wing extremist hate speech. I think we have all those words in there we need to explain what really happened. Bild goes on to say that it was a mega blow against right-wing extremists in Germany that came from the utmost top, like from the supreme leader. That is actually what they write. It's not a joke. This is not changing what they published originally. The German Federal Police Office, the equivalent to the FBI, the BKA in Germany, coordinated a nationwide crackdown against the potential publishers of hate agitating people who post insults against politicians on the internet. And the German Secretary of the Interior, he immediately published a statement about this whole thing, saying this here. Where's Mr. Dobrindt? That is him. That is Mr. Dobrindt. He said that this action day against hate is necessary because it is a weapon against radicalization and polarization of the society. That is Mr. Alexander Dobrindt also goes on to so European Union coordinated regulation of the social media on the net. The international press reacted heavily on these events. Some called it the Gestapo revival in Germany. Many outlets, of course, right-wing extremist outlets in the United States reported on that. But what actually happened in reality in Germany is far worse than what these outlets are talking about. 170 raids and arrests have taken place. Doors were kicked in. Doors from people who did nothing more than publish something on X, for instance, criticizing German politicians, calling them idiots, for instance. That is a criminal offense in Germany. So they kicked down the doors, they confiscated telephones, they took away computers, and now are prosecuting 170 people, openly admitting to the fact that this was all done to have these people refrain from using their free speech, right? Because 99% of what they did at the end, that's what Dorn also said, at the end will turn out to be formally legal. But still, the state cannot tolerate it because, quote, hate is not an opinion.
Well, J.D. Vance was right on the Munich Security Conference. I mean, we have the early signs, and the question is, where do we go from here? Obviously, the German police must be bored out of their mind that they have 170 operations to basically find people that post something online. And sometimes it's just a meme. It's not even an insult. I mean, the question is moron, if somebody is a moron, is that an insult or is that the truth? I mean, let's be honest. Everybody who has to do that is scared of any public opinion or anything that could change not in their way. And like J.D. Vance absolutely rightly said, if you are afraid of your voters, unfortunately, there is nothing we can do. And the same thing, I would say, we should always respond to these politicians, because we caught them blatantly lying Friedrich Merz, for example, with all the orgy, the German chancellor, with all the orgy in the last days before he was elected, when he went on the campaigning trail, he promised that with him there will be no additional funding that will be needed. And now we're talking about €1 billion. So obviously, we know from media and free media, not from the government state media, we know that he prepared basically with lawyers, how can we break this? And that's why they actually had the confirmation in the parliament with the old parliament that was not even elected, because you remember they were seizing the parliament, then they had the new election, and afterwards they took the old majority to bring down basically the change of constitution.
Equivalent to a beautiful bill, like a spending orgy. With a billion euro, or it's a German billion that would translate to the US billion. That's the ceiling that there will be no extra spending. So this is sort of his central committed to last day. While at the same time, he also announced that this, what we're now experiencing, is going to happen. He announced this crackdown on free speech. While at the same time, he came around with this gigantic lie that this is a form of corruption, actually. He actually called it.
Yeah, I have a bit of a technical problem here. I can hardly hear you. It's just breaking up all the time. And I don't know if it's the live event, but yeah, I mean, what you say is absolutely right. You know, the question is, how do we get out of this? There is nothing worse than influencing a discussion where you can't have a second opinion. I mean, there will be absolutely the wrong way that we are taking, and I think it's very, very, very dangerous what we're going to do.
The interesting thing is that we're fix these technical issues in the background. That's the thing people live podcasts. I'm sorry, we get that repaired back. They took place, and that's not a joke. Again, we have to state that here, sort of every second minute. These events actually took place on George Orwell's 122nd birthday. So call it a coincidence or not, somebody might have scripted that, but Germany actually decided to seize these computers, these phones, to have his crackdown on free speech on the exact date of George Orwell's 122nd birthday, and that was one day after the German government took a major blow in a German federal court case, because on the day before, the highest German administrational court ruled that the former Secretary of the Interior's effort to outlaw a critical German magazine called Compact magazine, which is labeled, of course, a far-right or right extremist magazine, that court ruled that the ban that the former Secretary of the Interior, Nancy Faeser, tried to set into place is, quote, illegal and is not acceptable under the German constitution. This blow to the government's policies was more or less expected by most commentators, because it was an extreme violation of the German constitution. Although the German judicial system is considered lost to this political extremism from the far left that the government represents, this case was such an extreme overreach that it was expected that the government might take this blow. So this crackdown came exactly one day after the ruling of the court. The date of the ruling was set many weeks in advance. So again, it might all be a coincidence, but of course, it might have been otherwise. Well, while free speech in Germany is obviously crumbling, and the leftovers of it are under heavy fire, at the same time, the Islamic takeover of the European Union and Germany with it is well on its way. Actually, in the last days, something happened that most people, even the most critical people, have not expected to take place. At first, the parliament, or the government of the city-state of Berlin, ruled that it now will change its neutrality law that actually existed up to now, allowing teachers and public officials wearing Muslim scarves like hijabs in classroom, something that was right now forbidden because of neutrality rules of the state in the last years. They now agreed with the ruling conservative and conservative party in Berlin, the CDU, the same party that Chancellor Merz belongs to. And only a day later, from northern Germany, this headline came up, which irritated even the most convinced fans of diversity. Let me just find this Weltschlagzeile here for you. That is this one. And this was really quite a surprise, even for the most open-minded liberals. It says Welt, the Kiel University, the state-run university of northern Germany in Kiel, puts Salafism and gender segregation into place during the so-called Islam weeks they orchestrated, and this sparks criticism. The Christian Albrechts University in Kiel obviously allowed an Islam week to take place, during which students of that university were encouraged to use separate entrances and sit separated from each other, men and women. It is not known if there were any intersexual seating organizations there too, but men and women were supposed to separately enter the university. And this was all conducted under the auspices of the leaders of the university, where they're now quoting that it was not known to them that there was any pressure put on the students. This was just, quote, an offer made to students to take place or to take part in during the Islamics, or to reject it and just continue on with their normal studies. But Herman, that sounds a bit like they're just trying to evade the tension that is rising, because this was an official program, an official thing accepted by the university leadership, and this was part of their official planning.
I highly applaud what they did, because otherwise people will not recognize what's going on. I mean, to be honest, I would assume that also in this university there's a lot of wokeism in, and you know what? Force the girls to wear a hijab. Force the girls to use a different entrance. Force them, basically give them a stick and let them experience what it means. To be honest, that is the only way they will actually find out something's really wrong here, right? Because in this case, I highly applaud. I would say you should do an Islamic month instead of an Islamic week, and just take your lesson. And to be honest, it's the best thing that can happen to us, because we preach about it. But once you sit there and you have to use a different chair because men were sitting in front, women were sitting in the back, that's a fact. So wake up, smell the coffee, and read Mikhail Hollebeck, the French author, who says at 5%, these Islamic groups, and it's not all Muslims, these Islamic groups want political representation. We see that in Berlin, going what you just said with, the headscarf. It's allowed in schools. We are taking, day by day, we take another step. And we have the issue over and over that very young Islamic culturized, mainly boys, are taking the responsibility in class and telling girls not to wear short skirts. They say you should cover your head. It's just the beginning. But all I can say is we have to take a different direction. Let them do it. Because maybe then the population wakes up and say, no, this has nothing to do with the Western world. So I applaud it.
I get that, but the thing is, the really interesting thing about this Kiel event is that it's obviously backed by the state-run university, and it is an open proof for the fact that they are actively supporting this thing. Like the dean of the university, a man or a woman called Maya, said that she had no information about which speakers are on the list of this group organizing the Islam Week. It was the Islamische Hochschulgruppe Kiel. I would translate to the Islamic University Group Kiel. That was the group organizing the whole event, but it had full backing from the university dean, from Miss Maya there. At the same time, she tries to excuse herself with the fact that she had no idea who would hold their speeches there. Obviously, some people who saw this whole event and students who protested later on said there were massive amounts of anti-Semitic stickers on laptops and posters. The students were approached by the organizers and asked to use these different entrances and sit on different places. So it obviously was nothing that was just an offer to people, but they were openly pushing for Islamistic laws there. And now the state-run university tries to excuse itself with the fact that it had no idea. I mean, this is what's happening on a larger scale all around Germany was taking place in a nutshell there in Kiel University.
She should be replaced with a Muslim man, the dean. I'm sorry, but that is the only way. You know, I mean, come on. Which German NGO funded by the German Ministry of Family, of Diversity, which one is receiving the money? It's pure corruption. And then to say, I had no idea, I'm sorry, not good enough, you got to go. Right? So, to be honest, it's a crack in the matrix that I think not many people look and go, oh my God, you know, that's kind of a nice, how do they call it? Not only the Islamic week, but how do you say in German school politics? It's like tryout, right? But you see, we have these pictures from the Munich park in the middle of Munich, where you have hundreds and thousands of Muslims, you know, taking their prayers. And you see it if you want to see it and if you be capable of seeing it. But I think the best thing is that we put these kind, and mainly women, under pressure to say, taste your own medicine. You are not allowed here. You are not a man. You can't sit in front. You have to cover your head. Maybe then they wake up that this is probably not the future that they want.
I mean, just beyond all form of cynicism and joking, you're most likely correct if you look at the groups supporting this. I mean, you have especially women or extreme liberals, as they call themselves, if that has anything to do with liberalism, supporting this kind of policy. So you have left-wing women with colored hair heavily supporting this kind of so-called tolerance towards Islam. It's really comparable to gays promoting the Gaza liberation and telling us that how liberal they could live down there, where you always get the impression that these people have no idea what they're talking about. So actually, maybe you're absolutely right, and maybe the reality is the only thing that will help them get their head straight.
Well, ask people who are gay in Berlin who is their biggest problem. It's not the far right. It's basically the usual suspect that will remind them that it's not opportune to be gay. And to be honest, I think most of the gay people are sick and tired of these weird-haired, colored women to speak for them. And, you know, who are we to tell somebody who they have to love or what they have to do? But don't promote it that openly. And not in every instance is, you know, the Muslimic belief is a complete different one. And the question is, can we balance it? Or at one point they take over? Then I can imagine it's not going to be fun to be openly gay in Berlin. Sure. Which it isn't already.
And just to remind you of that, we have the head of the former ruling party, the Green Party, Umit Nuripur, a man with Iranian background, openly calling for the introduction of Sharia law in Germany. He officially did that, saying that those parts, quote, those parts, end quote, that are compatible with the German constitution, those parts of the Sharia law should be introduced in Germany to promote tolerance. So it is open policy of the German regime to support this Islamic takeover of everyday life in Germany and what's left of the German constitution. And at the same time, we are now witness to the fact that obviously the policies, the EU war policies are now coming into action, or just stepping up, because the US deficit obviously aids the EU war plans. If we take a look at some of the recent propaganda published by the aforementioned German tabloid Bild, it has now come this far in Europe, or in Germany especially, that Bild openly says the NATO countries are constructing a new Iron Curtain. That is what this would translate to. And it is not something that Bild is framing negative in any way. No, they actually are very happy about the fact that in this picture, Polish soldiers are, quote, remilitarizing, or planning to remilitarize the border to Russia. calling it a good thing, Bild asks rhetorically, can only a new Iron Curtain save us from an attack of Russia that Bild indirectly calls imminent? And then Bild goes on to say that the NATO countries are sure it needs some form of terror or some form of frightening effect against Russia directly at the borders, and that's why the construction of such instruments or such an infrastructure is already commencing. Bild then goes on to explain how the situation during the Cold War was and why the situation now should be very similar and why a new Iron Curtain is a good thing. That, one could say, was the European deep state view of things, something that is not supported by the only relevant power within NATO, and that, of course, still is the United States. But something changed just 2 days ago because NATO, the NATO summit that was organized by Mr. Mark Rutte, came to a very drastic result. The NATO summit that is also reported on here by Bild, that led to the European NATO states now dedicating 5% of its per capita, of its GDP, 5% to the NATO financing or to the NATO fees, and that is something that Mark Rutte here heavily celebrated as a gigantic success. Mr. Rutte, a former head of state for the Netherlands, was reported on as being very polite towards Trump and openly celebrating him, not only with certain private text messages that Donald Trump instantly published on the net, where he applauded him on being the greatest president in history, like Rutte was more or less using Trump rhetoric to flatter Trump. And at the same time, even Bild is a bit curious about the fact that Rutte went on to call Trump the daddy who just solved the problem with Iran. Daddy had to put his fist to the table. He did that very successfully. Again, he congratulated Donald Trump and applauded to him. And now what basically happened here, Michael, is that obviously the NATO states agreed to put 5% of their per capita into the funding of NATO. And Herman, that is the result from a financial point of view, 5% of GDPs of these countries going into more or less directly American-owned armament companies.
Absolutely. But there are in my view, a couple of strategy behind it. I mean, if you see the indebtedness of the US, it's probably good from the US to say, you know what, Europe should just be indebted as we are. I mean, for the Germans, we are talking about a 200 billion burden on our financing capability. And of course, we had this Rearm Europe initiative from the EU. We have the infrastructure. So a total of 1,000 billion euros will be issued. And so Germany is going more into debt, which was the anchor of the stability and the anchor of the positive rating that we have. And we will see that this will deteriorate over time. But even worse than that is that German politicians basically still believe that with issuing, this 1 trillion in the US terms, 1 trillion in new debt will be a Zeitenwende, basically a change of time, and we are rearming, we are re-infrastructure initiative, and all this will not happen. I give you one example. We have some of the material, the best performing company is Rheinmetall, and they are producing some of the stuff that Germany wants to order for rearming the German army. They produce it in Australia. So, the first estimate was all cost will be 35% higher. So you see all these money that they will issue will go into administration, will go into tariffs, will go into insurance, will go into transport, which in the end has absolutely no effect on the future. If you invest something, you want something out of it. If you build a bridge, obviously people can move faster so they can be productive. But all this, what we see in Germany, is not going to be productive. So all I can say from my view is it's just robbing the country of any kind of left assets. What they want to do with Germany in the end, I don't know. But mainly we can take the view that we are preparing for war. And what you said earlier with the Iron Curtain is the sad part of it is the land mining. So Poland, Finland, and all the Baltics exited an agreement from 1997 in Ottawa, which basically disallowed the use of landmine, of personal landmines. And what we do is we are putting all this back. And one of the sharpest critics on this was Lady Di, way back in the day. I saw an event once where she campaigned for anti-land mining. And I have to say the UK first response was, this should never happen. We cannot try to basically build up a wall with land mining, but they do. And it shows you step by step by step. They are numbing the population of the EU. They are numbing the population of Europe. And they bring us all closer to war, which is not a good sign.
Quite obviously, and the big, the Titan vendor we had there in the relationship between NATO or the rest NATO of Europe and Trump's USA now, Herman, is that their interests seem aligned in this respect, that the 5% goal is something they want, but probably out of different reasons. I mean, Donald Trump will most likely see these 5% payments as a direct asset he gets, or a direct input or a direct gain for his battle against the gigantic U.S. deficit. Because if you look at where the money goes, you just mentioned Australia, Herman, but this Australia-based Rheinmetall daughter that producing the whole thing is again owned, and a majority, of course, by U.S. hedge funds such as BlackRock. So it's money more or less directly going from European countries to the U.S., and that is absolutely what Trump demanded ever since his first term, where he said that the Europeans are not paying for their defense or for the costs of NATO, and he wants to make them pay for that. So from Donald Trump's point of view, this is absolutely an absolutely realistic and rational thing to do. The reason that the NATO changed its rhetoric against Trump that this extremely or this much, of course, because we remember Trump was heavily criticized as more or less an idiot and an anti-intellectual, somebody who's almost an illiterate. They were just went over the top to insult Trump, and now all of a sudden he is Big Daddy. He is the one world sheriff. They all applaud him, and that, from my point of view, the only reason being that they are very willing to take away 5% of their per capita from the inmates of the European Union, pay it more or less directly to Trump, just to have a support for their war plans against Russia. So it's a win-win situation for the Trump policy and to battle the deficit, and the EU policy to go to war with Russia. We're more or less heading towards an open war with Russia.
Absolutely. And that's the scary part. But why is Donald Trump doing what he's doing? Because he can, and we let him. And he knows, look at the picture with him and Rutte, because he knows how weak European leaders are. European population everywhere is, I would say, lazy and lethargic, because we elect leaders that cannot even be close to anything that Trump did. You know, they don't have the spine. They all corrupt. I mean, they surf on a wave where everybody is friends and we all hold hands and we all use the word together, better together, build better together, all this kind of nonsense. I mean, the first thing is you have to make sure your own country is better off. And what we see in Germany, for example, is that if we start trying to fund this 5% and looking at the German budget, and we are not saving.
Sorry, there is no
no, there is no way. And they are plundering the rest of Germany. So you will see Donald Trump, way at the beginning, said the German car manufacturers will become American car manufacturers. And here we go. But he doesn't need it because he has Tesla. Tesla is so productive compared to the German car companies. Volkswagen came out with an initiative basically because we had robot taxi day in Austin, where the first time the robot taxis were driving around taking people and paying a flat fee of $4.20. Volkswagen came out and said, we have this bully, we can have 6 or 8 people sitting in there. I think, who's believing that? Who in the hell believes Volkswagen will be actually close to introducing something meaningful?
Well,
and what
not even Volkswagen themselves seem to believe that, because they just recently agreed to convert one of their factories to a weapons production facility, and they're pretty happy about that.
It's their only chance. I mean, You see, they are shedding people. They had the biggest layoff that they had in company history.
20,000.
You have a German ownership, a government ownership in Volkswagen. That means they will hold the line as long as they can. They have a massive reduction of profits. So in the coming years, they will not be profitable at all. They don't have a product that the market wants. Obviously, China as a huge consumer market is falling apart for them because China now has much better cars and the electrification in China is in full swing. So, you know, you see the CEO since Merkel, the CEO of Volkswagen is very aligned with all the woke nonsense and all, you know, if you go to any kind of manufacturing facility from Volkswagen, the first thing you see is a rainbow street crossing. What does that have to do? Do your job. Your job is to make sure the company is profitable, it can pay his people, it can pay a fair wage, all this. But it seems to be forgotten. And if you see, Rutte is just the example of everybody else. They have no chance with a stick. And that is why Trump is the daddy, because he has the big stick and nobody can stand up to him. And if you see the empty phrases by von der Leyen, of the EU, yeah, we want to be competitive.
It's pure LinkedIn talk. I mean, seriously, if you
100%.
if you look at these transcripts of their speeches and what they post, I mean, this could all be just originally copy pasted from LinkedIn. It's crap talk about leadership, how they support each other. It's completely without any form of information, and it looks as if, I don't know, if somebody kicked out the writing staff at Netflix and they just came out with a sad copy of the Rings of Power. I mean, it's really it's that obvious, and still there's no protest on streets in Germany and the European Union.
Yeah, it's like the frog in the boiled water. I mean, they boil it up and the frog sits in there. He's not going to jump out because obviously the German population, as well as the French, to be honest, they are not protesting loud enough as well. The Italians, you know, it's kind of the calm before the storm, because all this will come at once. And I'm not saying the markets are crashing. I'm just saying we are deteriorating slowly but surely. And if you walk around Berlin, if you walk around Frankfurt, if you walk around Munich, you can see the poverty coming, you know. And everybody who has an open mind and just looks at people and says something is different than 10 and 20 years ago is already far right and will have an introduction to the German police if you post it on Facebook or whatever and you say, I think we will run into trouble because the way the politics are shifting us is not right. That already is enough to be visited by the police. And I think, you know, it's good old Mao, which Merkel always loved, is like punish one and educate 100.
Very true indeed. And this wraps up this week's edition of EuroWars. I want to give a big thanks to my co-host Herman, of course, and also to our technician Herman, who managed other way around, to my technician Michael in the background, who managed to save this connection here during the troubles Herman had. That's the thing if you do live broadcasts like this. So thank you very much, the anonymous Michael, and thank you very much, my not so anonymous Herman, for being on the show. This was this edition. Join us next week for your breakdown on politics and money in the deep state hellhole that is the so-called European Union.